all that is to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all that is to Sri Om Ajnana-Tirandasya Gyanam-Jana Shalakaya Chakshudipiritam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Kirtha Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsya Shri Rupam Sagragatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Vadan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Sya Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kamsana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhamsute Pranamami Hare Vanchaloka Tarikesha Kripa Sindhu Gairusha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Shaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Todayam Mudiraya Nastapesha Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatim Tamashloke Bhakti Raghava Swami Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Today we are reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto number 4, chapter 31, entitled Narada Instructs the Prajetas. Text number 6, right? 6. Yad ādis bhagavatā śivenādhoks ajena nacha tad griheshu prasaktānām prāyaśah apitam prabho ādis bhagavatā śivenādhoks ajena griheshu prasaktānām cha griheshu prasaktānām prāyaśah apitam prabho ādis bhagavatā śivenādhoks ajena cha griheshu prasaktānām prāyaśah apitam prabho. Was instructed Bhagavata by the exalted personality Śivenādhoks, Lord Śiva, ādhoks ajena by Lord Vishnu, cha also, tat that, griheshu to family affairs, prasaktānām by us who were too much attached, prāyaśah almost, apitam forgotten, prabho O Master. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Sri Bhakti Raghava Swami, Sri Prabhupada ki jai. O Master, this is the Prachetas addressing Narada Muni. O Master, may we inform you that because of our being overly attached to family affairs, we almost forgot the instructions we received from Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu. Kindly repeat after me. O Master, may we inform you that because of being overly attached to family affairs, we almost forgot the instructions we received from Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu. Report. Remaining in family life is a kind of concession for sense enjoyment. One should know that sense enjoyment is not required, but one has to accept sense enjoyment in as much as one has to live. as confirmed in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 1-10. Kamasya nendriya pritihi. One has to become a Goswami and control his senses. One should not simply use his senses for sense gratification. Rather, the senses should be employed just as much as required for maintaining body and soul together. Sri Chaitanya Swami recommends anashaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjataha. One should not be attached to sense objects, but should accept sense enjoyment as much as required, no more. If one wishes to enjoy the senses more than required, he becomes attached to family life, which means bondage. All the prachetas admitted their fault in remaining in household life. So especially with the beginning of Kartik and the Amodarastaka prayers, and today also being the disappearance of a very important, great personality in our Vaishnava Sampradaya, Sri Thakur. Our Bhagavatam gets a little short. Just a few small things, and before we go to the purport, in relation to such a great personality as Narottam Das Thakur. Of course, today we are chanting the bhajan which he himself composed in great lamentation for departed souls. Sri Narottam Das Thakur, we may recall, never directly or personally met Lord Chaitanya. Narottam Das Thakur, Srinivasacharya, and Shyamananda Pandit, those three great personalities who performed actually such great preaching in various parts of India. Although they never got the direct darshan of Lord Chaitanya, they became such great exalted personalities. And this was coming to my mind how many of our present-day devotees within our Iskcon society also did not get the direct darshan of the founder Acharya of our society. However, as Prabhupada instructs, what is most important is not the Vani, or rather the Vapu, or direct contact, but understanding the Vani or the instructions of such great personalities. In the case of Narottam Das Thakur, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, beginning with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and of course all of the Goswamis, which means basically that even though for a growing number of our devotees within Iskcon society, lesser and lesser devotees will be within this society having had the direct darshan of Srila Prabhupada or hearing directly from him in person. Still this movement continues and will continue because of the very process we are adopting of receiving, hearing these transcendental instructions upon which our whole life can actually become transformed. Another just small point, to again encourage all of us, or most of us especially coming from outside of India. Most of us are not coming from Brahmana families. Of course, many people in India are also not coming from Brahmana families. And in Kali Yuga, even coming from Brahmana families doesn't really mean that much very often. Narottam Das Thakur also was not from a Brahmana family. And there are nice stories to that effect, we won't get into them. But again, the process of Krishna consciousness given to us by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as instructed directly by Lord Chaitanya himself, when, as we all recall, when speaking with another very great personality, Sri Ramananda Rai, who was very hesitant to speak in the presence of Lord Chaitanya, when Lord Chaitanya requested him to kindly speak about what is the most important thing in life, and he wanted to hear. And we all know the very important instruction given by Lord Chaitanya, that it doesn't matter, you're thinking you're a householder, you're thinking that you're not from a Brahmana family, because also Ramananda Roy was not from a Brahmana family. We have many exalted personalities not from Brahmana families that should encourage us. Lord Chaitanya instructed, Kiba vipra kiba nyasi shudra kene noi, Jai Krishna tattva say Guru Hari. Whoever is fortunate to grasp, to realize Krishna tattva, the essence of Krishna consciousness, regardless of one's material situation. So connecting to the verse here, the Prachetas are admitting, because when we meet such great personalities as Narada Muni, we have to open up. We can't hide anything. We should not hide anything. So they're telling that actually we have to tell you something. We have to tell you that we just about forgot Krishna consciousness because of having entered into family life. Although many years ago we received instructions from such great personalities as none other than, Lord Vishnu and Lord Śiva. But having entered household life, and just imagine this is going back, not just 1 decade, 2 decades, but I mean yugas, right? Where conditions were much more favorable for practicing Krishna consciousness. So therefore, we need to understand some of the points being mentioned here by Srila Prabhupada, that the human form of life, although this is an argument many times people will present, I'm sure some of you have heard it directly, if God exists, why has He given us this material body which is demanding all kinds of sense enjoyment every second of the day? Why do we have these senses if it's not to enjoy, you see? So, of course, that's the beginning understanding, which is also acknowledged and there in our Vedic culture, the whole theme or understanding of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So, there are two levels actually of this dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And it's very important for us to understand these two levels. Most people who are devoid of Krishna conscious instructions or understanding are especially in the middle two of those four. They're into artha, making money, and kama, enjoying, by having made money, sense gratification. Now our Vedic culture actually teaches us that, as it is mentioned here, there is a certain level, amount of sense, we could say necessity. There are basic necessities of the body. Just like some of you are possibly looking at your watch already, and 9 o'clock is around the corner, prasadam is not too far away. So there are material necessities for the body, but the Vedic culture is such that it is helping us by this transcendental knowledge, and especially by association with great personalities like Narada Muni, that it actually should be not only minimized. Prabhupada is making the point here that actually we don't need sense enjoyment. We don't need sense gratification. And Prabhupada makes a very powerful statement which probably blows the mind of most materialists when they hear it the first time. We don't need sex life. Wow. So otherwise, why we would be training young boys to be brahmacharis? Brahmachari means tapasya brahmacharina samenacha damenacha, means controlling the mind and controlling the senses to the point that one actually remains a celibate student. Brahmacharya life especially means celibacy. Celibacy, if possible, for the whole life. Naistika brahmachari. As Srila Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, Naistika brahmachari is actually the ideal for brahmacharis. Of course, brahmachari life, Prabhupada says, the best way to train one to become a full, lifelong brahmachari is brahmachari life. And the best way to train someone to become a responsible householder is also brahmachari life. Same. Because actually, when one takes up brahmachari training, if one is not able to remain full life, like Naistika brahmachari, then he should become an ideal householder. And Prabhupada defined what is an ideal householder. One time he spoke about ideal householder is Grihastha brahmachari. The brahmachari understanding means having the minimum of sense enjoyment, means the minimum of sex life as well within householder life. Again, for people who are not knowing about Krishna consciousness, this is totally what we call utopian. It's a nice idea. It's not even a nice idea, actually. For most people, it's not at all a nice idea. And for devotees, it's a real tough one also. It's not so easy because of our upbringing. So the point being made here is that actually, and I wanted to connect a little bit with that, because that's going to be one of the presentations in the coming few days at these meetings, how our Vedic culture is so expertly arranged, meant to be so expertly arranged, has been actually conceived. These systems, there are systems, there are scientific systems within our Vedic culture which allow us to actually not forget our main duty and responsibility in life, which is actually to always strive for self-realization. And when one enters family life, there are dangers. There are very big dangers, major dangers, if one is ill-prepared, especially. I mean, if one is ill-prepared, one generally fails within householder life. And even when one is prepared, because it is Kali Yuga, and because of the whole contaminated atmosphere in which we're living. And this is one of the reasons, because I'll make a connection here with one of the very important themes, which sometimes I have to make up for speakers who give or present Bhagavatam. Some of you may know or may not know that in Bhagavatam classes, although it is not an absolute 100% rule that every single speaker, every single Bhagavatam class has to speak or make connection with the theme Varnashrama, but sometimes I have to make up for those who kind of like neglect that. Our Vedic culture, I just heard a very interesting, expression a few days ago when I was actually in Hungary. There was a very important conference, actually, a 6-day conference on what is called Pillars of Sustainability. And although we know, we've heard of Vedic culture being primarily what we call agrarian culture, where living a householder life based on the principles of Krishna consciousness means living what we call, or entering the Grihastha ashram, spiritual householder life, so to speak, is often, or at least at times, referred to agrarian culture. But I had heard for the first time a few days ago what to me was a new expression, that Krishna consciousness not only is agrarian culture, but professes or promotes or is based on an agrarian religion. I still actually have to research a little bit where that comes from, but it's been used by some of our leaders within the Iskcon society, which I thought was interesting because the culture and religion are two different things, although in the Vedic culture, intimately related, intimately connected. This is very important. Of course, we don't have very much time to elaborate on this point, but it's very important to understand that our Vedic way of life has built in within it the basic guidelines whereby even within, for example, householder life, because out of the 4 ashramas, the 3, beginning with Brahmachari, and then going to vanaprastha and sannyas, are, first of all, totally forbidding one who is in any of these 3 ashramas to engage in sense gratification, and in particular to engage in sex life. The only concession for sex life, as we know, is within the household ashram. So, but our culture is such, Vedic culture is such that that training, if one takes up the training before entering householder life, one will be able to maintain that focus and will be, in other words, protected even within householder life. Otherwise, it is practically impossible. And as we can see here, even such great personalities as the prachetas, they admit that even though they receive proper training, proper instructions from very exalted personalities, I mean, who can be more exalted than Lord Vishnu and Lord Śiva? Lord Śiva is the greatest of Vaishnavas, and yet, even though it means that even one, there are many other examples actually. One of them comes to mind is Ajamil, isn't it? Ajamil, he was born in a Brahmana family. He got, we can assume, training as a young man before entering householder life, because that's the custom, that's the system. But he became allured and totally left, of course, as we know. All of the instructions he had learned rather, and for his whole life, of course, fortunately at the end, because that culture was still there, he had called one of his sons as Narayan. We know the whole story. So it means that we as individuals and we as a society, Krishna conscious society, have this responsibility, this mandate to actually, of course, begin by applying these instructions in our own lives as the first step. And second, we have the duty and responsibility to present that and to actually show by example as well how in all spheres of life, including and possibly especially, because nowadays, as I'm sure many of you are knowing, family life, Grihastha ashram, or in common day understanding, let's say, family, we call family life, or the family nucleus in itself is being challenged in a very major way. You know, people are married life, you know, this is part of the fallen condition of modern society, having deviated in major ways from the Vedic culture. So one of the important goals and missions of our Krishna consciousness movement is actually to reintroduce, and we can speak actually of social reform. We in many ways as a society are meant to be, and actually Lord Chaitanya is often referred to as a great social reformer, isn't it? Not only was Lord Chaitanya speaking and preaching about and demonstrating, of course, about Krishna consciousness based on the chanting of the holy name, but also he brought about major social reforms, and we as a society should also be keeping that in mind. And that social reform, we should also understand, is very directly based on, you know, these 4 varnas and 4 ashramas, and has to do with actually reintroducing, taking, of course, into consideration time, place, and circumstance, what we call the Vaishnava culture, of course, but also what is referred to as Varnashrama culture. That's a big topic and a big theme in itself, but I just wanted to make a little bit of the connection, and I also want to leave a few minutes for anyone who may have, because we have some exalted personalities here in the audience who might like to share some light or make some comments on our instruction today, on our verse, or maybe take a few questions by some of our devotees. Either one. We have about, the clock is right, 5 minutes before releasing everyone for the next program this morning. Any comments or questions? Yes. Is there a mic? No mic. There it is. Come in.
The whole Pandava family after the war, they were enjoying a royal opulence.
Who was enjoying royal opulence?
Pandava.
Pandavas. Okay, yeah.
Arjuna also got married with their woman like that. So is it not a sense gratification? Extra?
Extra? Did you say extra? Kings were allowed extras. Kings were allowed to marry many wives. And kings, when we know the Vedic culture, kings, they must show opulence. But they must show also detachment from that opulence, because that in itself, as we know, is an opulence. Renunciation, isn't it? One of the 6 opulences. So, our Vedic kings, such as the Pandavas, you're talking about the Pandavas, were ideal Vaishnava Kshatriyas. So we need to know what it means to be an ideal Vaishnava Kshatriya. We need to know what it means to be an ideal Vaishnava Brahmana. We need to know what it means to be taking up the occupation of an ideal Vaishnava Vaishya. We also need to know what it means to take up the occupation of an ideal Vaishnava Shudra, although we often don't use that term. So in other words, whatever occupation, whether it's Kshatriya, Brahmana, Vaishya, or Shudra that one may take, because we have to take some kind of occupation, within which we have basic necessities of life, but the guidelines are given in the Shastra. And as long as we keep in focus the goal of life, even living in opulence, we have millionaires within our Iskcon society today. We have more than one also. Most people maybe only know one, who's possibly a little more prominent, but there's nothing wrong with having opulence if one is detached from that opulence and properly utilizing it in Krishna's service. So the Pandavas were not into sense gratification.
So sense gratification is adjustable according to Varna and Ashram?
No. Sense gratification for all Varnas and Ashramas is meant to be rejected. We are not aspiring or working towards sense gratification. But there is a minimum of what we call is, I would say, maybe easier to use the term, meeting basic needs or necessities of life. You see? Meeting basic, like eating. Every day we have to eat. So there is some, some pleasure in eating. But that pleasure, first of all, it is fulfilling a basic necessity. But we do it in a particular culture by preparing foodstuff which is offered to the Lord, and we are regulated in when we eat and how much we eat and all of these things. So it is a gratification in that sense, but it is minimized. And ultimately, Prabhupada makes the point that when we are Krishna conscious, then it is not what we generally term as a material, sense gratification, because all the activities, including eating, for example, for devotees, is a spiritual activity. Eating prasadam. Actually, we generally are corrected by some senior Vaishnavas. Actually, we don't eat prasadam, right? We honor prasadam. We are meant to honor prasadam, not just eat it. So it's a consciousness, it's a question of consciousness. So some basic sense necessity, meeting the basic needs is there, but not what we call, as most people do, in an enjoying mood for our own, sense pleasure. Sorry, before I take another question, I just want to know there's another one here, don't mind. Quick. Right here. And that'll be the last question because, that's the way it is.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, we know that in the initial times you were looking after preaching, that was what you were doing. But later on, you
gave that up.
No.
You rejected that.
No, you took up an ashrama. That's a prabho ashrama very seriously. So I wanted to know, what made you change your focus or attention? Can you just share?
Okay, within 30 seconds, I'll explain. That's tough, actually. When I was involved in youth preaching, when I was involved in Namhata preaching, which was before youth preaching, I had not come across, it takes a while for us to read or to realize certain things in Srila Prabhupada's books. There's so many books, Prabhupada said it's going to take a lifetime. So I came across something which I had not realized before, which helped me to really, I knew about Varnashram, but did not understand its deep implications. And that is found in, and I'll give you the reference for that, in the essay on Gita Nagari, which appeared in 1956 in Srila Prabhupada's Back to Godhead magazine. The essence of it is actually there, and that's where I got my inspiration. Hare Krishna. Jai Grantha Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki.